Hey folks, welcome back to the Sedgwick Jimmy channel. We're certainly glad to see you, and today we're taking a look at the People's Crusade, also known as the Pauper or Peasants' Crusade. And interestingly enough, this was the first crusade, predating the first military crusade. Yeah, that's a lot of times to say crusade. What happened? Why did it happen? And how did it happen? Well, that's what we're here to look at, so let's get into it. The People's Crusade began in 1096 during a time of turmoil. Disease, drought, and famine had hit the population hard. Add to this the appearance of several natural phenomena, such as a comet, an eclipse, and a meteor shower, and you have quite a chunk of the population believing that the end of the world was coming. So you had a large population of unhappy, hungry, and not very financially well-off people believing that the end was nigh, and all they really needed was someone to light a spark to get the flames going. That man was Peter the Hermit. After hearing that Pope Urban II had called on Christian kingdoms to retake the Holy Land, Peter the Hermit began to travel around France and Germany, preaching and recruiting for a People's Crusade. He claimed that he had been chosen by Jesus. He even claimed to have a letter from Christ confirming this, and the people ate it up. He was able to amass a ragtag army of about 40,000 followers, pulling people in from all over Europe, and began his march to Jerusalem by heading through the Rhineland. What followed is rather unsettling. Now, the downside to calling Christians to arms in order to combat non-Christians is that there are a lot of non-Christians and most of them aren't bad. Many looked around them and thought, hey, why go to Jerusalem to fight non-Christians when there are plenty here? And thus outbreaks of anti-Semitism began. Part of the issue came from Judaism allowing usury, whereas Christianity did not. Therefore, when Crusaders needed to borrow money in order to buy crusading supplies, they had to borrow money from Jewish people. This did not sit well with many Crusaders. A lot of them thought it was necessary to convert Jews in order to stop the Muslim advance with a combined front, and they meant converting by any means necessary. Torture, murder, robbery, forced baptisms, all the godly stuff. They destroyed entire Jewish communities throughout the Rhineland, killing upwards of 12,000 men, women, and children, resupplying the Crusaders and terrifying everyone. Some bishops were paid off to hide Jews from the approaching horde, but this didn't always work, unfortunately. Peter led his forces to Cologne, where he planned to recruit more people to his cause. The other leader of the People's Crusade was Walter Sanzavoy, and yes, his name literally means Walter without property. While Peter preached and recruited in Cologne, Walter and several thousand French crusaders marched on, crossing the Sava River and arriving outside the gates of Belgrade. When the commander of Belgrade's forces saw Walter's army approaching, they denied them entry, leading to the crusaders pillaging the country outside the city walls, clashing with soldiers from the city. Also during this time, 16 of Walter's men were caught trying to rob a market across the river in the city of Zamun. The men were stripped of their armor and the armor was then hung from the city walls. Put a pin in that, it'll be important later. Seeing as their welcome was pretty much worn out, they headed for the city of Niš and Constantinople beyond. Peter and his followers, still 40,000 strong, left Cologne and split along the way, some going on land and others sailing down the Danube, and they met back up in Zamun. Now, when they arrived, they couldn't help but notice the 16 suits of armor on the wall, armor that they recognized, and this created some distrust. Add to this a riot started by Crusaders after an argument over the price of a pair of shoes where nearly 4,000 Hungarians were killed and the Crusaders were forced out and across the Sava to, you guessed it, Belgrade. Having dealt with the first wave of Crusaders under Walter and seeing a much larger second wave coming under Peter, the people of the city fled, leaving Belgrade behind to be pillaged and burned. They then set out to Niš, where they were offered an escort to Constantinople under the condition that they leave immediately, which they did. However, a disagreement ensued on the road along the way, leading to a windmill being burned down, the fire spreading, and the army of Niš killing a quarter of Peter's men. Eventually, they also arrived at Constantinople. They came together in Constantinople and added other crusaders that had also arrived in the city, then headed out into Asia Minor, though Peter was warned to avoid the Turks, seeing as they were an actual trained and armed army rather than whatever you wanted to call Peter's followers, though they did have a few lower ranking knights along with them. They moved from town to town, sacking and pillaging, until a group of about 6,000 Germans took the nearby castle of Ziragordos in order to use it as a base of operations. Eventually the castle fell and the Crusaders were forced to convert to Islam or were killed. Peter traveled back to Constantinople to get help, and while he was gone, the remaining force chose to move on without him. A big reason for this was that Turkish spies were planting rumors that the German force that had taken the fortress had also taken the city of Nicaea. And not wanting to miss out on that sweet plunder, they defied Peter's orders and headed for the city. They didn't make it far. It's actually argued by some that they only made it about 3 miles, as a Turkish ambush was waiting and the Crusaders were wiped out. A few thousand, including women and children, were able to hole up in a nearby castle and wait out a siege until military reinforcements freed them. These were the only survivors of the People's Crusade. Oh, and as for Peter, he kinda disappears from history not long after that point. And that's just gonna about do it for our quick look at Peter the Hermit's People's Crusade. And if you liked it, give us a like. If you want to see more, give us a subscribe. And if you have anything to add or ideas for future episodes, let us know down in the comments. Don't worry, we're gonna be doing all the popular Crusades, so come back here for more Sedgwick Jimmy in the future. Come check it out.